Hello, and welcome to the Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring you interesting and timely information, whether you're a volunteer, a community sponsor, if you're a refugee resettlement staff person, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more. We hope that you enjoy today's session on welcoming LGBTQIA plus refugees and services provided by Rainbow Railroad. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance. We do this for sponsors, resettlement agency staff, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. Next slide. Just for some housekeeping notes, as a reminder for everyone who's joining us today, everyone on today's webinar is automatically muted. However, if you have any tech issues, please submit a question in the chat or the questions box so that we can assist you. There will be time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A. Additionally, the presentation and any resources and a recording will be sent to everyone following today's webinar. This brings us to our presenter for today. Our presenter is Sarah Senyuk, who is the Director of Engagement at Rainbow Railroad. I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having us. We're so glad to be here. Let me just share my screen with y'all. Amazing. Well, thank you once again for having us on today's call. During our brief period of time together, I'll just be sharing a little bit about who Rainbow Railroad is as an organization, the kinds of work that we do, building out some greater context around the global displacement crisis and what that means for queer refugees, and how we're starting to think about building safe and affirming care and services for LGBTQI plus refugees, and specifically what we're doing with our communities of care model here in the US. So to start, who is Rainbow Railroad? So the long and short, Rainbow Railroad is a global not-for-profit organization with a 20-year history of supporting LGBTQI plus people who have been facing persecution and supporting them on accessing greater safety. To try and meet the diverse needs and circumstances of vulnerable LGBTQI plus people that are seeking help around the world, Rainbow Railroad operates in 5 different program areas. The very core of our program is our emergency travel support, where Rainbow Railroad helps at-risk LGBTQI plus people get to safer cities or countries and request protection where necessary. Rainbow Railroad also has a cash assistance program, providing financial resources to help LGBTQI plus people live with dignity. We engage in partnership development, where we provide advocacy and support to local organizations around the world who are serving their communities in queer-phobic countries. We have a crisis response team that provides both direct assistance and advocacy. Most recently, Rainbow Railroad has been responding to the anti-LGBTQI plus legislation in Uganda, and I'll share a little bit more information about some of our work in Uganda shortly. Next is information services and referrals, so that Rainbow Railroad can help connect queer people to post-relocation support no matter where they end up. And then finally, we have government pathways, and this is where I do most of my work with Rainbow Railroad. We have new partnerships with the governments of Canada and the United States to support the relocation of queer refugees directly to our communities. So we're doing kind of a lot of things in today's presentation. A little bit is going to be sort of broadening your understanding of what we're talking about when we're saying queer refugees, and how it is that we're trying to build services that are speaking directly to the needs of queer refugees. So I'll start by just defining a couple of terms and acronyms that you'll hear throughout our time together. Most commonly, Rainbow Railroad uses the acronym LGBTQI+ when referring to the community members that we work with. It's important to note that this is by no means exhaustive, because ultimately gender and sexual identities can be as varied as there are people in the world. When we break down the acronym, we have L for lesbian, women who are attracted to other women, or non-men attracted to non-men. Gay, men who are attracted to men. Bisexual, someone who is attracted to their own gender presentation and other genders. Transgender refers to someone whose gender identity differs from the sex they were assigned at birth. Queer is often considered an umbrella term for non-straight and non-cisgender individuals. And then intersex is someone who is born with sex anatomy that doesn't neatly fit within the binary male or female sex characteristics. In North America, other common letters that you may see included in the acronym include 2S, that's the number 2 and the letter S, which stands for Two-Spirit and is used exclusively by queer people who are indigenous to North America as an expression of their unique indigenous gender identities. You may also see A, which stands for asexual, or individuals who do not hold sexual attraction. And within the field that we're working in terms of humanitarian protection and refugee resettlement, we're often referring to these characteristics as SOGIs, which stands for sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics. So we want to have a better understanding of what we actually mean when we say gender identity, gender expression, and sex. The identities that are expressed in that acronym speak to both gender and sexual identities. And everyone's gender and sexual identities interact in unique ways. They fall on their own spectrums or scatter plots. And so we're going to do just a little bit more of a breakdown of what we mean when we're saying these different terms. So gender identity is how you feel in your own head about your gender. In binary terms, we often think of gender identities as man or woman. But again, gender identity is a spectrum or scatter plot, and where individuals can identify with aspects of manness or womanness. They can identify with both or none. People whose gender identities that are aligned with the sex that they were assigned at birth are known as cisgender, and people whose gender identities vary from the sex they were assigned at birth fall under the transgender umbrella. Next, we have gender expression, and this is how you choose to present your gender through your actions, through your dress, and so on. And it's super important to note here that there's not a one-to-one correlation between gender identity and gender expression. There's no one way to look like a woman, to look like a man, a non-binary person, or an agender person. We can't assume anyone's gender based off of their appearances. And so this is why part of normalizing sharing your pronouns and asking others to share theirs is a really great best practice. Next, we have biological sex, or the sex that someone was assigned at birth. And this refers to the physical sex characteristics that someone was born with, including genitalia, body shape, hormones, chromosomes, and so on. And again, we typically think of biological sex as also being binaried as male or female, but there is significant variance in biological sex. An estimated 1.7% of people around the world are born with intersex characteristics. And then finally, putting all of these pieces together, we also have to consider how an individual experiences physical or emotional attraction. And it can be greatly informed by an individual's gender identity and gender expression, and putting them all in relationship with one another. So now that we have a little bit of background on sort of the terms of phrase when we're talking about queer refugees, I want to talk a little bit about the context that we're looking at in terms of the global displacement crisis. We are, as I'm sure many of you know, facing the greatest forced displacement crisis in history, and we are annually setting new historic records on forced displacement. The UN Refugee Agency noted in their most recent Global Trends report from June that we have exceeded 120 million people around the world who have been forcibly displaced from their homes. This is double the rate of displacement from 10 years ago. Of those 120 million forcibly displaced people, 37.6 million are refugees. And while gender and sexual identities are not uniformly captured by UNHCR, an independent global survey estimates that approximately 9% of adults around the world identify as LGBTQI+, meaning that of that 120 million people who have been forcibly displaced, over 10 million are likely LGBTQI+. And that, again, means that there are over 3 million queer refugees. In addition to being displaced by countrywide war or violence, LGBTQI+ people can often be displaced because of their gender or sexual identities. Often LGBTQI+ refugees can continue to face homophobic or transphobic treatment in their host countries or in camps while they are awaiting resettlement. Intra-community violence remains a serious threat for LGBTQI+ refugees who have been displaced by conflict. This is so essential for service providers to keep at the forefront when they are considering how they are offering support to queer refugees, finding housing, sharing opportunities, and so on. Currently, there are over 60 countries around the world that criminalize same-sex relationships. On the map shown here, you can see that the punishments for same-sex relationships include the death penalty, life imprisonment, or years of incarceration. You'll also see a final category that says de facto criminalization, because while there are countries that might not have no laws on the books that directly criminalize same-sex relationships, it can remain dangerously stigmatized to be openly queer. On this map, you will likely see a couple differences. This is our requests for help map, depicting where we received the highest numbers of requests for help in 2023. And again, there are some differences here because even if there is no state-enforced criminalization, LGBTQI+ people can face threats and danger in any country. This last year, in 2023, Rainbow Railroad received over 15,000 requests for help. And the top countries where we've received those requests included Pakistan, Afghanistan, the United States, Uganda, Kenya, Turkey, Nigeria, Morocco, Russia, and Egypt. The United States being on this list brings up an important consideration, again, for service providers working not just with LGBTQI+ clients, but all their clients. While we generally consider the US as being safer for LGBTQI refugees, we're seeing rises in legislation across the country discriminating against queer and trans people. And the reality is that homophobic and transphobic violence can still happen within any of our communities. As service providers are welcoming newcomers, you can help set the standard on how queer people can and should be treated. To help illustrate how some of Rainbow Railroad's different pillars and programs come together, I wanted to share a short video about our work in response to Uganda's anti-LGBTQI legislation.
We will have our morals, we will protect our children, and we are making this law, for ourselves, we are making this law for our children, we are making this law for the children of our children. This country will stand firm. And once it passed, I can tell you, Madam Speaker, we are going to reinforce the law enforcement officers to make sure that homosexuals have no space in Uganda.
The day the legislation was signed by the president, the Speaker of Parliament tweeted, "The President of Uganda has done his job. Now it is time for the people of Uganda and the law enforcement to do their job." This was inciting violence.
Some of the East African presidents have made it very clear that it is illegal for one to be a homosexual. For them, speaking for human rights is promoting, letting people be what they are. It earns you 20 years in prison. For them, they feel that being homosexual is something that somebody learns, and because you can learn it, you can unlearn it.
That homophobia is actually not African. Homophobia is being exported by these extreme American evangelicals. Sharon Slater from the Family Watch International is now convincing Ugandan politicians that conversion therapy works. Our politicians are convinced, and in fact, they want to offer her a piece of land to build this facility.
None of these members of parliament who are pushing these bills to the parliament, none of them has ever had an opportunity to call this community, talk to this community, understand them, who are they, what are they going through.
Because right now, the community is in so much danger. There is so much hatred. There's so much propaganda. We've been working with Rainbow Railroad, providing alternate safe housing to post bond and bail for LGBTQ persons. We've been able to provide some level of security, advocacy, and information.
The greatest thing we need is reliable partners like Rainbow Railroad and the people who really support Rainbow Railroad in all the work that we do internationally. Because this has to be a joint effort so that we are building a grassroots movement and supporting these communities.
I am hopeful that at some point we will be successful as long as we are able to hold the American evangelicals accountable for the hatred they are promoting.
We will have our morals. We will protect our children.
So hopefully that video gave y'all a little bit of a sense of how the different programs that Rainbow Railroad engages in can come together in real time to respond to a ongoing international crisis. So going back to the types of requests for help that Rainbow Railroad receives. Some of the most common concerns that we have seen reported include community rejection, verbal abuse or threats, community violence, family-based rejection, and other kinds of life-threatening violence. But in some ways, this kind of language can distance us from understanding what LGBTQI+ people can be experiencing in their day-to-day lives. LGBTQI+ people can be targeted by police for unlawful detention and arrest. They can face the destruction of their property by community members or state actors. There are often threats of blackmail. We've seen cases where individuals will create fake accounts on queer dating sites or social media in order to collect materials against LGBTQI+ people and threaten to out them. Some communities will target queer people with conversion therapy or exorcisms, both of which are extremely dangerous practices mentally and physically. And there are, in fact, some places in the US where conversion therapy is still legal. Queer women can often be targeted for sexual violence or forced rape or forced heterosexual marriages, and queer people often face greater threats of human trafficking. So when we are thinking about welcoming queer refugees, we have to keep the experiences of persecution and trauma at the forefront, because the reality is that the resettlement structures in the US were not created with the needs of queer people in mind. And again, while the US is generally safer for queer people than many other countries, we still have seen this increase in anti-trans and anti-queer legislation. We cannot assume that our community's services are going to be safe and affirming for all queer people. And this is in fact true for all refugee populations in general. Of the rising anti-immigrant rhetoric that we're seeing, anti-refugee policies that are popping up around the country. But when we build practices of welcome that are rooted in care, safety, and affirmation for LGBTQI clients, we ultimately build systems that benefit everyone. So these are just a few kind of values to help center how you are thinking about either building or adjusting the kinds of services that you provide to queer people so that they can be more affirming. So one that is super easy to do is utilizing inclusive language and practices. This can look like introducing a practice of sharing your pronouns verbally on your name tags or screens and your email signature, and building a culture where it's expected for everyone to do the same, not just for queer people to be doing this. The practice is really only meaningful when it is normalized across the spectrum. You can opt for gender neutral language in your resources. You could do an audit of your orientation materials, things that you provide to clients. Does it rely heavily on gendered language like husband, wife, man, woman, he, she? It's really easy to make the switch toward using a gender inclusive variant such as spouse or partner, adults, or they, if you don't know the genders of the people that you will be working with. At the very heart of making this kind of shift of utilizing inclusive language and practices is not making assumptions about anyone's preferences on pronouns, name, or how they would describe themselves or their close relationships. We can aim to create opportunities and safety for people to feel like they can share with us. And that leads directly into my next point of confidential. Many LGBTQI+ clients are arriving from situations where it was physically unsafe for them to disclose their gender or sexual identities, or they may have faced discriminatory or violent treatment as a result of a disclosure. So make a practice of proactively affirming their safety by explaining the kind of confidentiality that they can expect from you and by following through on those promises. When it comes to disclosure, make sure that you are really clear with who they have already disclosed to. Outing a client is frankly a form of harm, and it is a direct violation of their confidentiality. It's not just an issue of respect, but also one of safety, because again, there may be other clients, colleagues, or partners that could be queerphobic or hold some queerphobic beliefs. Next is client-led. We encourage folks to let their clients set the pace around the kinds of opportunities they want to pursue, what kinds of actions or words would help them to feel most safe with you or in your services. Letting them inform you on the kinds of community that they are wanting to build. Do they feel comfortable and curious about being integrated into queer community spaces? What is their relationship like with wanting to be connected to other folks from their home countries? And once again, this also comes to letting them set the pace on disclosing the kinds of identities that they hold. Next is flexible. These are all just frameworks that can and should be adjusted from client to client. Each person is going to have their own relationship to their gender and sexual identities and to what feels safe and affirming for them. And as those feelings of trust and safety build in your interactions with your clients, the kinds of support or services that they may need from you can change. And then next is to check your biases. This is true for everyone engaging in any kind of work that is based in community building. Where are there any lingering anti-LGBTQ biases in your work, in yourself? Are there places or people that on closer inspection might not necessarily be safe specifically for your LGBTQI+ clients? This does not mean you have to throw yourself away or throw other people away, but it does mean a willingness to engage in bringing people together on being more safe and affirming for LGBTQI+ people. So I would love if folks could share in the chat box for just a couple minutes of how some of these values might manifest in different parts of service provision or refugee welcome. And thinking about what these values have to say about how you might look for housing for a client, how you might consider job placement, choosing physical or mental health care providers, or what cultural orientation might look like. I'll give folks just a minute or two to share some of their thoughts in the chat box. Amazing. I see training our interpreters on more inclusive language and working with them for linguistic and cultural equivalencies. This is super, super important. And also because all of the information that I just shared about gender identity, gender expression, sexual identity, those are all from a Western perspective. And so your clients very well will have a different understanding of their own gender and sexual identities. And so needing to be open to hearing how it is that they conceive of their own gender and sexual identities, and how it is that we're communicating that across languages. Well, I will let folks think about this, and we can always come back to it during our Q&A at the end. I'm going to shift now to talking about how Rainbow Railroad is proactively building these kinds of safe and affirming welcoming practices through what we have been calling communities of care. And I'm going to play just another brief video for folks to introduce the work that we're doing now.
There's a profound experience of loneliness that comes with fleeing. Queer and trans refugees often flee on their own, leaving behind the familiarity of friends, family, and community. It is a deeply isolating experience. And once you arrive in your safer country, adjusting to your new home can be difficult and daunting. Especially if you don't know anyone or have a community. You become a stranger overnight. Through Welcome Corps, we're building communities of care across these United States. We're building a movement. We're helping LGBTQI+ individuals access a dignified life, free from persecution.
As a gay man, I know what it feels like to not belong. I also know how privileged I am, which is why I got involved and formed a community of care with my husband and 3 friends. We have a collective responsibility and a shared duty to help. As a volunteer, we help queer and trans newcomers settle into their new home and access all the benefits of living in an LGBTQI+ friendly city. We connect them to LGBTQI+ friendly healthcare, sometimes for the first time in their lives. We help them find employment. We show them how to navigate the city and public transportation. And we help them find a place to live and create a new home. And we do all of this with the help and support of Rainbow Railroad.
We decided to partner with Rainbow Railroad on Communities of Care because we believe that every single LGBTQ+ person deserves safety and freedom. And we believe that they can find that here in the United States of America. There's so much power in our collective strength, and we have the opportunity to co-create home and belonging for LGBTQ+ newcomers. To let them know that they are worthy, they have people in their corner, to welcome them to the US, and to help them thrive. To celebrate them and to celebrate with them.
We face many obstacles finding a pathway here in the United States for LGBTQI+ people at risk. We finally have this opportunity and we need your help. Join us and be a part of queer history by creating a community of care with you and 4 friends. We can transform the lives of queer and trans newcomers by being in their corner and empowering them with critical support and resources. Your time and contribution, no matter how big or small, will make a monumental difference in a refugee's life. Do your part today. Sign up to volunteer. Together, we can co-create home and belonging for LGBTQI+ newcomers here in the US. There's a profound experience of
So what you may have gathered from this video is that Communities of Care is the partnership model that Rainbow Railroad is utilizing with Welcome Corps. I assume that most folks on this call are already familiar with Welcome Corps, but just in case you're not, Welcome Corps is a new US government program that is allowing everyday Americans to get directly involved with welcoming refugee newcomers to the US. So with our partnership with Welcome Corps, we are mobilizing groups of 5 or more volunteers who are queer or queer allied to be part of your LGBTQI+ refugees' first welcoming community. This group will support the newcomer with accessing the services and supports during their first 90 days that would typically be provided by a resettlement agency. So this includes getting their social security cards, state IDs, health screening setups, and being introduced to healthcare providers, ESL classes, finding that first job, and finding long-term housing. But most importantly, this group will introduce the newcomer to their new community, sharing how to navigate the day-to-day and accessing LGBTQI+ affirming spaces. So we are referring to these groups explicitly as communities of care because from our perspective, this is the type of community building that can be most difficult to access and is most needed for newcomers to be successfully integrated. With Rainbow Railroad's partnership, we are able to match communities of care both with refugees who are in the US refugee resettlement pipeline and with refugees who have submitted a request to help directly to Rainbow Railroad and meet Welcome Corps' criteria. Rainbow Railroad is dedicated to making the communities of care opportunity as accessible as possible. We don't want the ability to fundraise to be a reason that a group who is otherwise enthusiastic and has the time and knowledge to serve, we do not want that to be a barrier. So we provide additional assistance to all of our communities of care, both monetarily and with technical support and fundraising support, both through the application process and post-arrival periods. If you are interested in partnering directly with Rainbow Railroad to welcome queer refugees, you can scan this QR code, or you can head to rainbowrailroad.org to learn more or to submit a volunteer application with us. And that is all that I have prepared for y'all. I just wanted to say thank you again for giving us the opportunity to share a little bit about Rainbow Railroad's work and what it is that we're trying to build in the US with our communities of care. If you're wanting to support the organization or any of the work that we do, again, you can head to rainbowrailroad.org to keep learning, to take action, to donate, and to get involved. And I think I will hand it back over.
Thank you both for presenting and fielding questions for today. Thank you everyone who took time out of their busy days to attend this RWC Lunch and Learn. On behalf of Refugee Welcome Collective, I want to thank you for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.